Hey, Twisted people, it's your Twisted Woman here, Chauncey K. Robinson, aka Twisted CKR. And thanks for joining me in the replay and for those of you in the chat. And thank you for being here as I'm going to talk about today American Horror Stories, the spinoff to American Horror Story, episode, I guess you could say this is episode 5 by this point, right? Episode 5, Baal. BA''AL. And basically with this one, we had a young married couple who are trying for a baby. And so what we got with that was some mini twists and turns. And I'm just going to straight out and say it that this is probably, in my opinion, the best episode of this season thus far. It felt like a well-rounded story. It felt like there was actually a beginning, a middle, and end. Fleshed out characters, twists and turns that kept you actually engrossed. The pacing was good, even though it was a one episode, as these are horror story, it felt complete, like a short story that you would read in a book where you're like, oh yeah. And Pato thinks so as well. My cute girl, Pato. Yeah. So I'm curious to know what you all think, what your grade is for this episode. I'm going to give you mine. We're going to go over what actually happened this episode, the creep factor, the horror factor of this episode in particular. And, definitely just the overall, was this scary or not, and things like that. So basically my grade for this episode, as I said, this is the highest episode for me of this series thus far. And, for those of you who watched the last live stream that I did, that also probably had Pato in it because she loves to jump up during my streams, I was talking about how I felt like this season of this show started off really weak, in my opinion. It felt almost like a supplement for people who maybe watched American Horror Story, because the first 2 episodes, which was a 2-parter for some reason, Rubber Woman 1 and 2, very much felt like it was, basically a reference point, an addition, a bonus scene of some sort, a bonus story to those who already watched American Horror Story. And as I said in that stream, I didn't think that was very new user friendly for people who are new to this universe of American Horror Story. And so, and the story was just really weak and I think it was Ryan Murphy and leaning into some of his not so great tropes that he tends to lean into when it comes to a series. And then I felt like Drive-In was a lot better. And then we had the Naughty List, which I actually thought was better than Drive-In. So what I have been saying is that my cat keeps getting in front of me. But also what I have been saying is the fact that I feel like these episodes are increasing bit by bit. And if this is the case, I'm very happy if we keep going on a higher and higher stint with these episodes, because Drive-In was solid. I had a few things here and there. And then the Naughty List felt a bit more well-rounded, although it definitely leaned a little bit more into the silly factor. And then this happened, Baal, however you want to pronounce it. And I just really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was going to lean into a lot of tropes that I wasn't used to, that we have been used to before when it comes to evil baby, evil pregnancy kind of a deal. And I kind of felt like what was so awesome about this episode is that it turned that on its head. A lot of times when it comes to shows like this, or stories like this that deal with, we have Rosemary's Baby. We had one that I did recently, False Positive, that was also a Hulu original movie, that a lot of the time I feel like the agency of the woman is taken away. I also feel like the woman kind of becomes meek in a way, to the point where it's almost like everything's just happening to the woman in the story, and that she's so focused on just being a mom and just having a baby, which makes them tend to be like very one-dimensional. And what I really appreciated about this episode was that was not the case. At first I was worried it was going to be the case, and they kind of jumped right into her having had the baby. Wasn't any weird pregnancy stuff that was going on. She had the baby. And it was very much about her trying to do something, her trying to figure something out, feeling like she was going crazy. And then at the end, she totally takes her agency back. She becomes in charge of the demon. She decides what she wants. She wins in the end, which I kind of thought that wasn't going to happen. I was going to be very annoyed about this episode. But when the twist came at the end, it was awesome. This is by far the best one for me in this series. And I want to know what you all think. Let me know in the comment section if you think this is one of the best ones of this season thus far. I surely think it is. My grade that I'm going to give, and I want to know y'all grade in the comment section. And also, if you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, is an A. I definitely just thought this episode had everything I would want in a short horror story. There was fleshed out characters, there were scares, and then there were twists and turns that kind of had you like, I was not expecting that. I can honestly say I was quite surprised for a number of reasons. And so let's get into that. Let's get into why I was surprised, what was actually happening with the show. And also I want to kind of share my screen with a picture of with our man of the hour, or our demon of the hour, Baal himself, because why not? Because this was the demon of the hour. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about this demon and the question of culture and stuff when it comes to what people look for and things like this, when it comes to how we interpret demons, depending on the culture that you're in. And so, let's just kind of go through what actually happened this episode, not like bit by bit, but like just some of the major things. We had the young couple, they were struggling, and it was very interesting that from very beginning, there was kind of this understanding that she, the woman, was well off. She inherited from her, from her grandfather, and he was a struggling actor, her boyfriend and her husband. And so, what I loved about this is that it didn't fall into the trope that the relationship was having problems. And that helped in the surprise that happened, and the twist, I should say, the two twists that happened in the end. Sometimes with stories like this, they tend to show the married couple or the young couple having problems, and that the guy, there's something wrong with the guy from jump, and you're already just not trusting him. What they did with this episode is they very much leaned into, there is nothing wrong with this husband. He is totally very much supportive of his young wife, and he just wants best for her, to the point where it was almost like a red herring, right? You don't look at him. And I even said it as I was watching. I was like, this is different, Usually you kind of already suspect that something's going on with the guy. Either he's a cheat, he's messed up, and things like that. And they kind of tell it, they kind of showed their hand early on in subtle things. And what I loved about this was that they didn't do that. Yes, it turned out to be the case in the end of it all, but it wasn't so much the case. It turned out to be the case in the end of it all, but it wasn't really showed. So the point where it comes at surprise, not one of those surprises where it was like, okay, that came out of left field. It actually didn't, because he explains why he got to the point where he did, how he didn't want kids, how she was kind of pushing to have kids. And then when he does have a kid, it's like, really, am I going to have to raise this baby? I'm trying to be an actor. And all of that came out. Ray is actually in the chat. Hey, Ray, thanks for joining in this live review. Ray is saying, I was surprised with this episode. I'm glad I went back and watched it again. It lost me in the first 20 minutes. Yeah, I think, this is the thing about this show thus far, and especially Ryan Murphy stuff. Sometimes you're used to the over the topness in the very beginning, stuff just kind of being out there, kind of showing its hand. And this one was a lot more subtle, and it really told a story. I mean, the aesthetic was Ryan Murphy universe, but the story itself felt a lot more fleshed out, a little less on the spectacle and more on the story. And that's what I appreciated. It was actually a big surprise for me. So, then we have the idea of the wife dealing with what could be seen as postpartum. She's had the baby. She's not feeling like she's connecting to the baby. We have the woman therapist, the Black woman therapist. Again, I don't know what it is about Ryan Murphy's universe, but they are so much about Black women being therapists in these movies, in his shows. And then we had the Latina housekeeper, which once again was a little bit of a stereotype, right? The Ryan Murphy universe is not without its stereotypes, and these were two of them. Vanessa Williams was in this, right? And she's from Candyman, so I loved seeing her in a horror maven up in this thing, and she's in the upcoming new Candyman coming out. So it was great seeing her in this, and I liked that she kind of kept that, this kind of consistent kind of way. She wasn't a magical Negro trope or anything like that, but she did play the whole motherly, I'm here to help you thing, which is somewhat of a stereotype that they give the Black women in this genre. And with the Latina housekeeper, it was like, I see the devil type thing. Oh my gosh. And then she leaves out. I'm like, okay, that's stereotype hardcore, but all right, fine. So, we had that. And then, what comes from there is, she's seeing things and things like that. And then once we realized, it finally happens and she stabs the husband. What I found myself doing throughout this episode was looking for the tell. When you're someone who, and maybe you were doing this, let me know if you were doing this in the comments, where you were looking for the tell. You were looking for the thing that was going to give it away, whether or not she was really crazy, whether or not this really was a demon, whether or not she was being gaslit by, somebody with nefarious intentions. And those are usually the three tells in this. And that's why I say this turned the trope on its head, because it went the route of putting her in power, that is not the route you usually get. So many movies, the power that if the woman ends up getting any form of power, it's more so she goes crazy and no one believes her and she ends up in an insane asylum, or she ends up having the devil baby and that's just that, and things like that. And maybe she gets resignation to just kind of go with it, or whatever. Usually it's not the happiest of endings. But I would argue she had something of a happy ending. And let me know if you agree with that, because I think she actually had a happy ending, a happier ending than I've seen in this subgenre demon baby type thing or whatever, right? They totally went a different route with it. It wasn't, yes, it was that the husband was gaslighting her and things like that, but that wasn't the final aspect of it. Yes, it was the idea that people had nefarious intentions. Yes, she was being driven crazy. All those things happened, which do happen in this kind of subgenre of horror. But what doesn't usually happen is the woman taking control of the demon themselves, having sex with the demon at the end to get another baby, but more so getting her just the desserts and getting to keep her child. That is so rare. I rarely see that. And let me know if you've seen that before, because I rarely see that. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I was like, holy crap. Because I'm not the biggest fan of demon baby or possible demon pregnancy type stories, because like I said, I usually feel like they are very one-dimensional of the women and things like that. And I felt like this was, then again, I should have known with who they were having play the woman in this. If you know her, she was also in American Horror Story. If you watch American Horror Story 1984, and she usually tends to play the one who can kind of switch their character towards the end, right? She starts off sometimes as the good girl, kind of goes crazy, or she's crazy from jump. So I should have kind of known that it could be that way, considering who they had play this part. But I love that it went this way. I love it. Just going to take some of the live comments that are going on, but let me know y'all thoughts in the replay as well. Ray is saying, this is what I want. I want him to add another witch of color outside of Queenie, or give us more of Dina Stevens, because I think she is such a dynamic character that I want to know more about. Well, that's American Horror Story, right? We're talking about American Horror Stories, I think there could definitely be more women of color in particular parts in the universe of American Horror Story for sure. Fred P is saying, easily the strongest episode so far. Some genuinely creepy scenes, like when she looks into the baby monitor and Baal is behind her. Agreed. Hey, David, thanks for joining us. I definitely agree with you on that. There was some and that was another thing that's made this episode stand out. There was some genuinely creepy moments. If you've seen my other live stream, you know that I said that at times the American Horror Story universe, it plays on horror tropes, but not always in the sense of scaring you, but just kind of to establish, oh, it's horror. And I really felt like this episode played on some of the jump scares, some of the horror, even if it was fake or faked in the middle part of it, there was still some genuine creepy factor. And this is the thing about horror, you know, not knowing all the twists or knowing the twist and loving the journey. And I can honestly say I love the journey of this particular story. You know, she was hearing things like, I want him and stuff like that. They end up playing the Ouija board. And then we find out after all of this that we think it's kind of going in either the husband's not believing her and there really is a demon. You think it's going to go that way and things like that. And what we end up finding out is that she's been gaslit the whole time, you know, that not only was it the boyfriend, well, not only was it the husband, but it was the girl at the clinic. It was his friends. They all were in on it, which to me was just, it was a little bit suspension of disbelief, a little bit, but at the same time, it was like, yes, because, okay, I dug that they let this be a whole orchestrated thing. Because when it happens, you're like, whoa, that was him this whole time. And he got all of his friends in on it. And it wasn't necessarily out of left Buffalo. You know, he was saying, I'm working nights and things like that and things like that. And so you start seeing kind of the cracks in the relationship there, or the problems that could be had. And so when you see that twist, at first I thought that was the way it was going to end. And I was not happy about that. I appreciated that twist, but I was also afraid that she was going to end up in an insane asylum and he was going to get away with everything. And that kind of annoyed me at first. I was like, oh my gosh, is he really going to get away with this? Is this the end of this story? Is this one of those moments? Because my thing was, I only like that to happen if, let's say, the main character woman had problems or she was selfish and you're kind of like, okay, she kind of deserved that in the end, but she didn't. So when I thought that was going to happen, I was definitely going to give this a lower grade because I'm like, come on, that's not a good enough payoff because we've been with this character the whole time and then to find them all just kind of, and then we find out Baal was real. And he basically killed them all. I love that scene. That gave the gore that we needed, but also the creep factor, because it was like, what is about to come up? What is about to happen? I loved that it took that turn. I love that there was another twist happening. The husband ends up in jail. He kind of explains why things went down the way they did. He didn't want kids. She was kept pressuring him, and so on and so forth. And he was trying very much not to have a kid, and somehow they ended up having one. And that's probably when he kind of, came up with the plan of, I didn't want this baby and now I'm stuck with this and blah, blah, blah. And then we have the twist, the other twist, the final twist, the twist that made this chef's kiss, which is it was a summoning spell because the girl that he was cheating with didn't know any better. And it wasn't really a banishing spell. It was a summoning spell. And she had Baal under her control. And I mean, yeah, it was a little bit of a plot dump there. We definitely got the exposition dump, where she had to kind of, I don't know why, we knew she was telling it for us, the audience, but of course she's telling it to Baal like he didn't know. It's like, if this is real life, Baal would have been, okay, I know you did all that, but they had to tell us for the audience. And I loved that that's the way that turned out. And of course, it wouldn't be Ryan Murphy universe without some weird, freaky sex stuff. And so we got her having sex with the demon directly this time around. Now, if we're going to talk about a part 2, I'd like a part 2 of her story. I didn't think we needed a 2-parter of Rubber Woman, but I would be okay with a part 2 of wherever that ends up going. Yeah, David is saying, I say that was scary. Can't wait to see it. Fred P is saying the opening credits for this episode was also great. A redemption for last week's subpar opening. Agreed. I mean, the last week's episode, the naughty list, was very much about TikTok and social media heavy, and it played on that, weird videos of people doing social media. This one felt more like a story and less in leaning into, and this is also why I like this particular one, and Fred kind of touches on this. It wasn't so heavy on the pop culture stuff, because I feel like when you lean too heavy on the things of the moment, those kind of stories don't age well. If I was to watch it 5 years from now or something like that, where you play on something that's very much about the here and now, as opposed to, horror that tends to be classic is horror that transcends whatever era it's in. Like, you can watch a movie from the 80s, and there are some movies you can watch from the 80s, from the 70s, from the 60s that still hold weight, even though the times have changed. And I feel like, like Drive-In was a little bit of a victim of that, where it was very leaning on the current popular culture. Naughty List too, with the social media stuff, current popular culture. And I felt this one had more of a transcendent type flow to it, because it wasn't leaning on pop culture. It was leaning very much on a very human-like story. Tad Dawson is saying that it was messed up to gaslight your wife like that. I agree. That's why I was actually quite afraid that he was going to get away with that at the end, y'all. I was afraid. I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the end of this story? He gets in the car and gets his, sucked, and she just ends up in the mental, like, that's messed up. I was like, no, don't do that. I've sat with this woman for over 30 minutes at this point. Let her have a better husband. I don't know about all that, Todd. I don't know if I would have wanted that. Maybe he get his just desserts and killing, but I never advertised for that. But yeah, it was more like Alfred Hitchcock, for sure. I agree with that. And I also like the fact that it played on the whole idea of demons and culture and stuff. Because I do think, the things we in our culture might see as good and evil isn't necessarily good or evil in other cultures. Because the thing about Baal, who I have here on the screen next to me, for those of you who are watching, he is in some cultures considered a fertility god. He's not the devil necessarily, right? Baal was a god worshipped in many ancient Middle Eastern communities. I'm reading this from my notes, especially among the Canaanites, who apparently considered him a fertility deity and one of the most important gods in the pantheon. But, you see a totem like that and you think, it must be the devil. This is a devil kind of thing. Funny enough, I actually have a totem just like that. Not a totem. I have a thing that goes off. I wish I had kept it next to me. I'm going to take a picture of it and put in the community thing for you guys to see my little totem that I have that I just got because I thought it looked cute. And it was interesting that that was kind of the aspect of it. And thank you, Ty Dawson. I appreciate that. Thank you for watching and joining here in this live review I'm doing. Ray is saying, depending on where they are, I give some liberties on the tropes. Can't get mad at the mirror, just change the picture. This hurt my stomach with the cruelty of regular people, how terrible regular people are. And isn't that the thing about horror? One of the things I love about horror is that it tends to put a warped mirror to reality and highlight some of the things that are the real things that can make us afraid. People we love and trust, messing with our minds, not being able to trust our own perception, right? Which, a lot of people who have mental health issues deal with, where we can't sometimes, you're kind of questioning, am I thinking something? Is this real? Am I making a big deal? And things like that. That's an element of horror that many people in this country deal with, anxiety, all types of stuff. So I felt like this was something, that's why I said this was a story that I felt like transcends just the pop culture moment in time, but can be something that I would watch later and really be able to appreciate. And that's why I say this was the best one of the season so far. And I really hope that future episodes continue with this kind of storytelling, a storytelling that feels full and fleshed out. Okay, so one of the things I want to also talk about is how scary was this one? I definitely think this was the scariest one out of all of them thus far. But I will say that with a low bar in the sense. Yes, this was creepier. It was creepier and it was scarier than, comparatively speaking. And I want to know what you all think in the comments. Comparatively speaking, this was scarier than the other ones. But you also have to put in the context that the other one, the bar was super low because those just weren't really scary at all. They were violent. They had some jumps here and there, but they weren't really creepy. This one definitely had creep factor, scary, all of that. So it was one of the scariest one of the season. It's still not one of the scariest episodes of a short form that I've seen. But it definitely, comparatively speaking, was one of the better ones. And let me know, did you find this scary? Did you find this episode scary? Was there a particular part that really creeped you out? And what are your thoughts about demonology and, the study of demons and things like that, and how we interpret different demons or different beings from different cultures, right? For some people, Satan is evil. In another sense, there's evidence to believe that Satan came from, was first originated in Egypt, and he wasn't really evil to begin with, but somewhere down the line, he became this evil entity in comparison to the Christian God that people know. There's so many, it's so fascinating, and also looks as well, right? You look at something like this, Baal with the horns and everything, and us in our culture, maybe for those, I don't want to assume everyone who's watching is from the US, but you may assume, oh, horns, he doesn't look human, this is evil. And it's so funny because if you go in other cultures, that is not always the given, that a being that looks like this is evil. Even in the Old Testament, when it came to angels, there was the whole picture of angels where they had multiple eyes and weird wings and fire and stuff. Those were the way the angels looked in the first test in the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, they became more humanoid, right? They were people with wings. But at one point, they would look like what we might consider monsters. So I do find that interesting as well, that there's a little bit of a play on, in the end of this, Baal wasn't exactly evil, he was more so a being. And depending on who used him or evoked him, that was what he did. So I love that grayness of it. I really appreciated that. But yeah, overall, y'all, I thought this was a solid episode. I definitely give it an A. It's the best episode of American Horror Stories season 1 thus far, in my opinion. But I would also enjoy to hear y'all opinion on this. Do you think this was the best one so far? If not, what has been your favorite one so far? And overall, are you enjoying this season? I know I am. It's gotten better. I was a little worried with Rubber Woman 1 and 2, but it has steadily increased. So I definitely dug this episode, and I hope we get more episodes very similar to this in the sense of the way they told the story. So those are my thoughts. A from me on this, but let me know in the comment section. And thank you so much for joining me on this live review and breakdown of American Horror Stories episode 5, Baal. And until then, don't do any banishing rituals and things like that. And make sure to give this video a like if you haven't already. Thanks again, y'all. Thanks for joining.